to save her son. She had 1 month to win the rancher, not knowing he already loved her. The story begins with a widowed schoolteacher dust on her dress, fear in her eyes as the church bell tolls noon. A government man slams down the papers. Her boy, half native, will be taken in 30 days. Unless she can find a husband with land, she rides through the wind to a rancher's gate. A man hardened by loss, alone in his fields. He agrees, but only for a month. Whispers spread through town, keys clatter in the jail, and the railroad's shadow falls across the valley. Just when hope glimmers in a lamplit home, a forged deed threatens to tear it all away. What happens when a mother's desperate gamble collides with a rancher's buried heart? Can 1 month of faith and courage outlast prejudice, greed, and grief? Or will she lose the only 2 men she's ever loved, her son and the rancher who already loved her? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The afternoon sun blazed through the windows of Willow Creek's one-room schoolhouse as Clara Hensley stood at her desk, watching her students file out into the dusty yard. She dabbed her forehead with a handkerchief, the June heat making the wooden walls feel like an oven. The empty lunch pails swung from small hands as children called their goodbyes, their footsteps thundering down the wooden steps. "Good day, Mrs. Hensley," little Mary Thompson called out, her braids bouncing as she skipped past. Clara managed a warm smile, though her heart wasn't in it. "Good day, Mary. Mind those reading exercises we discussed?" As the last child disappeared down the dirt road, Clara began her usual routine of straightening desks and wiping down the chalkboard. The familiar motions usually brought her peace, but today her hands trembled slightly as she worked. Samuel would be arriving soon from helping old Mr. Jenkins tend his vegetable garden, a job that earned them extra vegetables for their table and gave her boy a chance to learn useful skills. The crunch of boots on gravel made her pause. Through the window, she spotted Thomas Weber, the territorial agent, making his way toward the schoolhouse. Her stomach knotted. He never came without reason, and his visits rarely brought good news. "Mrs. Hensley," he called out, removing his hat as he entered. "Might I have a word?" Clara set down her cleaning cloth, smoothing her skirts with hands that refused to be still. "Of course, Mr. Weber." The agent shifted uncomfortably, his tall frame awkward in the children's space. "Ma'am, I've received notice from the Indian Affairs Office regarding your boy." Samuel, the knot in her stomach, tightened. "What about my son?" "There's been a change in territorial policy." Weber cleared his throat. "Children of Cherokee blood are to be enrolled in government boarding schools for proper education and integration." Clara's vision swam for a moment, but she gripped the edge of her desk, forcing herself to stay upright. "Samuel is my son. He's receiving an education right here. The law's quite clear. Mrs. Hensley, unless the child has a father with sufficient landholding status, he must be placed in the boarding school program." Weber had the decency to look uncomfortable. "You have 1 month to resolve the situation." "Resolve?" Clara's voice cracked. "My husband is dead, Mr. Weber. You know this?" "Yes, ma'am." "Which is why the options are limited. Either find a husband with the required land status, or Samuel will be collected on July 15th. He placed his hat back on his head, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hensley. I truly am." Clara stood rooted to the spot long after Weber's departure, her mind racing. The afternoon light slanted golden through the windows, marking the passage of time she couldn't afford to waste. Finally, she gathered her things with mechanical movements, locked the schoolhouse, and began the walk home. Samuel was already there when she arrived, proudly displaying the basket of vegetables Mr. Jenkins had given him. "Look, Mama, we'll have fresh tomatoes soon, and Mr. Jenkins showed me how to tell when they're just right for picking." Clara pulled her son close, breathing in the sun-warm scent of his hair. That's wonderful, darling. Why don't you wash up while I get supper started? She moved through their small kitchen, preparing their simple meal of cornbread and beans, trying to find the right words. Samuel chattered about his day, his dark eyes bright with enthusiasm. So like his father's, it made her heart ache. Over their meal, Clara finally found her courage. Samuel, there's something we need to discuss. Her son looked up, a piece of cornbread halfway to his mouth. Is something wrong, Mama? Mr. Weber came to see me today. She reached across the table to take his hand. There's a new law about schooling for children like you. With Cherokee heritage. Samuel's fingers tightened around hers. What kind of law? Clara explained as gently as she could, watching her son's face change as understanding dawned. To her surprise, he straightened his shoulders, chin lifting in a gesture so reminiscent of his father, it nearly broke her. I'll be brave like Father was, he declared. Though his voice wavered slightly. He always said a Cherokee warrior faces challenges with courage. Clara swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. Yes, he did. But listen to me, Samuel. I'm not going to let them take you away. I promise you that. After Samuel was tucked into bed, Clara lit the lamp in their small sitting room and knelt beside her chair. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls as she bowed her head in prayer. Lord, she whispered, give me strength. Show me the way to keep my family together. Memories of her husband flooded back, his gentle strength, his quiet wisdom, the way he'd loved them both so completely. The fever had taken him so quickly, leaving them alone to face a world that didn't understand their love. As she prayed, her mind worked furiously. The solution would have to be found quickly. 1 month wasn't much time. She needed a man with enough land to satisfy the territory's requirements. Someone who would be willing to marry a widow with a half-Cherokee child. A knock at her door startled her from her prayers. Rising quickly, she opened it to find Sarah Miller, her closest neighbor, standing on the porch in the gathering dusk. Clara, I just heard from my Thomas about the agent's visit, Sarah said, reaching for Clara's hands. I couldn't sleep without checking on you. Clara drew her friend inside, grateful for the companionship. I don't know what to do, Sarah. I can't lose my boy. Sarah squeezed her hands. Listen, I've been thinking. Luke Carver's got more land than anyone else in the county. He's been alone since losing his wife and baby 3 years ago. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's a good man. Luke Carver. Clara had seen him from afar on his rare trips into town. A tall, weathered man who seemed to carry his grief like a shield. I couldn't possibly. He's one of the few men around here with enough land to satisfy the territory's requirements, Sarah pressed. And he's always been fair-minded. Never showed any prejudice against the Cherokee folk who trade at his ranch. Clara sank into her chair, mind whirling with possibilities and fears. Even if I could bring myself to approach him, why would he want to saddle himself with us? Because he's been alone too long, and that ranch needs a woman's touch. Because Samuel is a fine boy who deserves a chance. Sarah's voice softened. And because sometimes the Lord works in ways we least expect. Long after Sarah left, Clara sat by the lamp, making plans. She would ride out to the Carver Ranch at first light before she lost her nerve. It would take nearly 2 hours on horseback, but she couldn't waste any time. Samuel's future hung in the balance. She pulled out paper and began writing a letter to the school board, explaining that she would need tomorrow off her first absence in 3 years of teaching. Then she went to her bedroom and opened the cedar chest where she kept her best dress. The blue one she saved for special occasions. It would have to do for tomorrow. In the quiet house, Clara could hear Samuel's steady breathing from his small room. She moved to his doorway, watching his peaceful face in the moonlight that filtered through the window. I won't lose you, she whispered. I promise. As she prepared for bed, Clara thought of her late husband's words on the day they'd married. Despite all the opposition they'd faced, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust and love, She would need that kind of bravery tomorrow when she faced Luke Carver. She blew out the lamp and lay down, but sleep was long in coming. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the vast Oklahoma sky. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Clara closed her eyes and prayed for courage. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pink when Clara tightened the cinch on her old bay mare. Her fingers trembled as she checked the saddle's position one final time. Behind her, Samuel sat atop Mr. Thompson's gentle pony, practically bouncing with excitement despite the early hour. "Mama, look. I can make Thunder walk sideways, just like you showed me." Samuel demonstrated, his small hands guiding the pony in a careful sidestep. "Careful now," Clara cautioned, though she couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. The boy had his father's natural seat in the saddle, something that brought both joy and an familiar ache to her heart. The morning air held the promise of another scorching June day. But for now, the breeze carried the sweet scent of wild roses and sage. Clara mounted up, her split riding skirt settling around her legs. She'd chosen her best dress for this journey, though the dust would surely take its toll before they reached the Carver Ranch. "Stay close behind me, Samuel," she instructed, gathering her reins. "It's a good few hours' ride ahead." They set out along the rutted trail that led north from town, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust with each step. The countryside slowly transformed from the familiar settlement buildings to scattered homesteads, and finally to open range dotted with grazing cattle. Samuel chattered happily as they rode, pointing out meadowlarks and asking about every wildflower they passed. Clara answered automatically, her mind racing ahead to the conversation that awaited her. What would Luke Carver say to her impossible request? The man was known to be fair but reserved, keeping to himself since losing his wife and child 3 years prior. The sun climbed higher as they followed the meandering trail. Clara had to stop twice to help Samuel with his canteen and adjust his hat against the growing heat. By the time they caught sight of the Carver Ranch buildings shimmering in the distance, both riders and mounts were covered in a fine layer of trail dust. The ranch spread out before them, a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and various outbuildings, all well maintained. A split-rail fence lined the approach, and beyond it, Clara could see cattle grazing on the summer green grass. It was a prosperous spread, testament to Luke Carver's hard work and determination. As they drew closer, Clara spotted a tall figure working at the corral. Luke Carver's broad-shouldered frame was unmistakable as he wrestled with a post, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms. He looked up at the sound of their horses, straightening to his full height. Clara's throat went dry. She drew her mare to a halt at a respectful distance, helping Samuel dismount before sliding down herself. Luke watched their approach, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his battered hat. "Mr. Carver," Clara managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I hope we're not disturbing your work." Luke nodded once, his weather-creased face serious. "Mrs. Hensley," his eyes flickered to Samuel, who stood half-hidden behind Clara's skirts. "Young man, sir?" Samuel piped up, then fell silent, studying the tall rancher with undisguised curiosity. Clara drew a deep breath. "Mr. Carver, I've come to ask, that is, I have a matter of great importance to discuss with you." She glanced at Samuel, then back to Luke. "Might we speak privately?" Something in her tone must have registered, because Luke's expression shifted slightly. He drove the hammer into a nearby stump and gestured toward the house. "We can talk in the kitchen. Boy's welcome to look around the corral, if he's careful." Samuel's face lit up. "Can I really, Mama?" Clara nodded, watching as her son scampered toward the fence, already fascinated by the horses in the paddock. She followed Luke into the house, noting the clean but sparse furnishings. Everything was orderly, practical, a bachelor's home. with no feminine touches to soften the edges in the kitchen. Luke pulled out a chair for her at the solid oak table, then poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot warming on the cook stove. Clara wrapped her fingers around the tin cup, gathering her courage. "Mr. Carver," she began, "I'm here because of Samuel." She explained quickly about the territorial agent's visit, the threat of the boarding school, and the impossible deadline she faced. "I know this is highly irregular, but I'm asking if you would consider marriage." Luke's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. His jaw tightened, and for a long moment, only the tick of the clock on the wall broke the silence. "You're asking me to marry you?" His voice was carefully neutral. "To keep your boy from being taken." Clara met his gaze steadily, though her hands trembled in her lap. "Yes, I know it's a tremendous thing to ask, but you're one of the few men hereabouts with enough land to satisfy the agent's requirements." And she hesitated, then pressed on. "I remember how my husband spoke of you after the war. He said you were a man of honor, that you saved his life at Shiloh." Luke's expression softened almost imperceptibly at the mention of her late husband. He set his cup down and looked out the window, where Samuel was carefully approaching a gentle-looking mare in the corral. Boys got his father's way with horses. Luke observed quietly. "Yes," Clara whispered. "He does." Luke drummed his fingers on the table once, twice. Then he turned back to her. "I propose a trial arrangement. 1 month. We'll see how it sits with all parties concerned before making it permanent." Clara stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You'll help us." "I owed your husband my life," Luke said simply. "And you've shown courage, coming here like this. Besides," his voice roughened slightly, "this place could use a woman's touch again." And a boy's laughter. Before Clara could respond, they heard excited footsteps on the porch. Samuel burst in, his eyes shining. "Mama, Mr. Carver. There's the most beautiful paint mare out there, and she let me pet her nose." Luke's stern face cracked into a slight smile. "That's Patches. She's got a good eye for people." He stood up, regarding Samuel thoughtfully. "Say, boy, you ever held a branding iron?" Samuel's eyes grew wide. "No, sir." "Well, come on then. I've got some work to finish, and an extra pair of hands wouldn't hurt." Luke glanced at Clara. "That is, if your mama approves." Clara nodded, watching as Luke led her eager son back outside. She remained at the table, her coffee growing cold as she tried to absorb the magnitude of what had just transpired. The solution she'd prayed for had arrived, yet her heart was full of questions. What kind of marriage would this be? Could she learn to be content in this arrangement, living with a virtual stranger? As evening approached, Clara prepared supper from the supplies in Luke's pantry, beans and salt pork, with the last of the morning's biscuits warmed in the oven. The kitchen filled with familiar cooking sounds, but everything else felt strange and new. Samuel had spent the afternoon following Luke around like an eager puppy, helping with chores and soaking up every word of instruction about ranch life. They gathered around the table in the lamplight, an awkward family unit taking shape. Luke said grace briefly, then they ate in relative silence, broken only by Samuel's occasional enthusiastic comments about the day's adventures. Clara watched the interplay between man and boy, noting how naturally Luke answered Samuel's questions, how carefully he explained things. The lamp cast warm shadows on the walls and through the window. Clara could hear the evening sounds of the ranch settling down, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the barn, a coyote's far-off call. Everything was changing, she realized, for better or worse. She had set something in motion that would alter all their lives forever. As she gathered the empty plates, her fingers brushed Luke's hand accidentally. They both drew back quickly, like strangers discovering unexpected warmth in a handshake. Their eyes met briefly across the table, and Clara saw in Luke's gaze the same mixture of uncertainty and hope that she felt in her own heart. Samuel yawned widely. The long day finally catching up with him. "Mama, where are we going to sleep tonight?" The question hung in the air, making the reality of their situation suddenly, startlingly clear. Luke cleared his throat. "There's a spare room upstairs," he said gruffly. "Was my sister's when she used to visit. It's clean, and there's room enough for both of you." Clara nodded gratefully, fighting back tears of relief, exhaustion, and lingering anxiety. "Thank you, Mr. Carver." "For everything, Luke," he corrected quietly. "Reckon you'd better call me Luke now." The morning sun streamed through the muslin curtains of Luke's guest room, casting warm patterns on the patchwork quilt. Clara blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling beams above her. Beside her, Samuel stirred and sat up with the instant alertness of youth. "Mama." "We're at the ranch." He bounced on the mattress, his dark eyes shining. "Can I go see the horses, please?" "Hush now," Clara whispered, though she couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "We need to be mindful of Mr. Carver's household routines." She smoothed Samuel's rumpled hair, noting how his features, so like his father's, seemed even more pronounced in the morning light. The floorboards creaked softly beneath their feet as they dressed. Clara helped Samuel with his buttons, then donned her own simple work dress, adding a clean apron she'd packed. The house carried the aroma of coffee and wood smoke, telling her Luke was already up and about in the kitchen. They found him at the sturdy pine table, a cup of coffee in his weathered hands. He nodded at their entrance. "Ma'am, Samuel." His voice was gruff, but not unkind. "Help yourselves to breakfast. We've got some matters to settle before the day gets going." Clara served Samuel a bowl of steaming porridge from the pot on the cook stove, then sat down with her own portion. Luke cleared his throat. "About the arrangements," he began, meeting her eyes directly. "You can keep teaching at the school until term ends, but ranch work needs doing too. Cooking, mending, whatever needs attention. That fair?" "More than fair," Clara replied steadily. "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Carver." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Luke," he corrected. "Reckon we should use first names given the circumstances." After breakfast, Clara rolled up her sleeves and set to work. The butter churn stood in the corner, and she could see the cream needed attending. The rhythmic motion of churning was familiar, soothing even as she fell into the steady pattern of up and down. Through the window, she watched Luke showing Samuel the proper way to feed the chickens, her son's delighted laugh carrying across the yard. The morning passed quickly. Clara discovered worn leather tack that needed mending and settled on the porch with her sewing kit. The stitching had to be strong, and even lives could depend on sound equipment out here. She worked efficiently, her needle glinting in the sunlight. "That's good work," Luke commented, pausing by the porch steps. He'd been checking fence lines all morning, his shirt dusty from the task. "Most folks would have just tied a knot and called it done. My father taught me proper saddle stitching when I was young," Clara explained. "He said anything worth doing was worth doing right." Luke nodded, something like approval in his expression. "Samuel's got a good eye for horses. Thought I might show him the north pasture this afternoon, if you're agreeable." Clara's hands stilled on the leather. He'd like that very much. After a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Luke and Samuel rode out together. Clara watched them go, noting how naturally her son sat in the saddle beside the tall rancher. The sight stirred complicated emotions, gratitude mingled with an ache of memory. Hope tangled with uncertainty. She turned to the waiting laundry, hauling water from the well to fill the big copper wash tub. As she worked, she found herself studying the ranch house. It was well built but sparse, showing signs of a woman's absence, curtains gone yellow with age, a layer of dust on the higher shelves. Yet there was also evidence of Luke's careful nature. Tools hung in precise order, floors swept clean, supplies neatly stored. The afternoon sun was lowering when horse hooves announced their return. Samuel's face glowed with excitement as he tumbled from his mount, words spilling out in a happy rush. "Mama, we saw the whole herd. And Luke showed me how to read cattle tracks, and we found a hawk's nest, and he says tomorrow he might teach me to throw a rope." "Sounds like quite an adventure." Clara smiled, helping him wash up for supper. She caught Luke's eye over Samuel's head, seeing something soften in his usually guarded expression. The evening meal was simple: chicken and dumplings. Clara had prepared while doing laundry. When they sat down, Samuel reached for both their hands without hesitation. "We always say grace," he announced. "Father taught us it's important to be thankful." Luke's calloused hand tensed slightly in Clara's grip, but he bowed his head alongside them as Samuel earnestly thanked the Lord for their food, the ranch, and their new friend Luke. After Samuel was tucked into bed, Clara returned to the kitchen to find Luke still at the table, lamplight casting deep shadows across his features. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. She busied herself with the dishes, aware of his presence behind her. "He's a good boy," Luke said finally. "Got a quick mind?" "Yes," Clara agreed softly. "He does." Another long pause stretched between them. Clara could sense Luke wrestling with something he wanted to say. When she turned from the dishes, she caught him studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Lost my Sarah and our little girl to fever for years back," he said abruptly, his voice rough. "Never thought to have anyone at this table again." Clara's heart ached at the raw grief in his eyes. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Samuel's father, James, we lost him to fever too." 2 years ago? Luke nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. The lamplight flickered, throwing dancing shadows on the walls as they sat in shared silence. Clara felt the weight of the day settling over her, the strangeness of this new arrangement, the uncertainty of their future, the surprising comfort of finding someone else who understood loss. When she finally rose to retire, Luke spoke again. "You did good work today. Weren't sure what to expect, but you're stronger than you look." "Thank you," Clara replied, pausing in the doorway. "For everything?" He just nodded, his eyes reflecting the lamplight as she headed to the guest room, where Samuel's soft breathing filled the darkness with hope. 2 days slipped by like water over stones, and the morning brought the necessity of a trip into town. Clara adjusted her bonnet in the clouded mirror of Luke's washstand, trying to steady her nerves. Through the window, she watched Luke readying the wagon, his movements precise and unhurried in the early light. "Samuel, mind the chickens while we're gone," Clara called, smoothing her best calico dress. The boy nodded from where he sat cross-legged on the porch, already engrossed in teaching Luke's cattle dog to shake hands. The wagon ride into Willow Creek passed mostly in silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and the occasional comment about the weather. Clara noticed how Luke's shoulders tensed as they approached the first buildings on the outskirts of town. He wasn't any more comfortable with this than she was. Main Street stretched before them, dusty and already busy with morning traffic. Clara felt the weight of every stare as Luke helped her down from the wagon. Shopkeepers paused in their sweeping, and women huddled in doorways, whispering behind raised hands. The sound of her boots on the wooden sidewalk seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. "Mornin', Mrs. Hensley." Mrs. Thompson called from the millinery shop, her voice sharp with curiosity. "We've missed you at prayer meeting." "Good morning," Clara replied evenly, forcing a smile. "I've been helping with the ranch work these past days." More whispers rustled through the growing crowd of onlookers. Luke stood a step behind her, solid as an oak tree, his presence both comforting and complicated. "Mr. Carver," old Tom from the feed store nodded, his eyes darting between them. "Don't often see you in town these days." "Got business to tend to," Luke answered simply. Touching the brim of his hat, Clara drew a deep breath and faced the curious faces directly. "Mr. Carver and I are trying a match," she announced, her voice clear and steady, "for Samuel's sake and our own." The whispers grew louder. Clara held her head high, though her cheeks burned. She'd rather have kept their arrangement private. But secrets had no place in a town like Willow Creek. Better to face the gossip head-on. Luke's hand brushed her elbow. "Best see to the school board now," he murmured. The schoolhouse sat at the end of Main Street, its white paint gleaming in the morning sun. Mr. Avery waited on the steps, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the light. His thin lips pressed together at their approach. "Mrs. Hensley," he said coldly, "I trust you understand Samuel's status remains under review." Clara's spine stiffened. "I understand the board's concerns, Mr. Avery, as you can see. I'm taking steps to address them." Indeed, his gaze flicked dismissively too. "Luke, though, I wonder if hasty arrangements will satisfy the requirements. The territory has strict guidelines about these matters. Samuel's a bright boy." Luke spoke up, his voice low but firm. "Does well with his studies, from what I've seen." Mr. Avery's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Academic achievement isn't the issue here. Mr. Carver, we must consider what's best for all parties involved." Clara caught the threat beneath his words. "Samuel belongs with his mother," she said quietly. "The law supports that. Laws can be interpreted." "Mrs. Hensley, good day to you both." Mr. Avery turned and disappeared into the schoolhouse, leaving Clara trembling with anger and fear. Luke touched her arm. "Need to check on some supplies," he said. "Meet you at the wagon in half an hour." Clara nodded, grateful for the chance to compose herself. She headed toward the general store, but Luke's voice stopped her. "Clara." She turned back. "Don't let him shake you. We'll sort this out." The simple words steadied her. She managed a small smile before continuing down the sidewalk. Luke watched her go, then moved toward the livery stable where several men had gathered. He recognized some as railroad surveyors who'd been nosing around the territory lately, keeping his stance casual. He leaned against a post within earshot. Carver's north pasture would be perfect for the spur line, one man was saying. "Good grade, plenty of space for a depot." "He won't sell," another replied. "Stubborn old cuss. Every man has his price, or his weakness." The first man chuckled. "Heard he's taken up with the half-breed's mother. Might be useful." Luke's fingers tightened on the post, but he kept his face neutral as he moved away. The pieces were falling into place now. Avery's involvement with the school board, the sudden pressure about Samuel. His jaw clenched as he loaded supplies into the wagon. The ride home was quieter than the journey in. Clara seemed lost in thought, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. Samuel ran out to meet them, Luke's dog bounding at his heels. "Did you bring candy?" he asked, hopefully. Clara managed to laugh. "There's molasses in with the supplies. Maybe we can make some pull candy later." The evening settled into what was becoming a familiar routine. Clara cooked supper while Samuel helped Luke with the evening chores. The boy chattered about the day's adventures, a lizard he'd found, a new trick he'd taught the dog. Luke listened patiently, offering the occasional word of praise or instruction. After supper, they gathered in the main room. Samuel sprawled on the floor next to the fireplace, one arm thrown across the dog's shaggy back. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as Clara darned socks and Luke cleaned his rifle. "Thank you," Clara said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "For today, for letting us stay." Luke set aside his cleaning rag. "Reckon I should be thanking you. House hasn't felt this alive in a long while." Something in his voice made Clara look up. The firelight carved deep shadows in his face, highlighting the grief that lived in his eyes. "May I ask?" Double quotes. She hesitated, then pressed on gently. Why do you live alone out here? Luke was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Lost to my Mary and our little girl 5 winters back. Fever took them both inside a week. Clara's heart ached at the raw pain in those few words. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He nodded once, sharply. Been easier to keep to myself since then. Until now, their eyes met across the room, sharing an understanding born of similar losses. Samuel shifted in his sleep, his fingers tangled in the dog's fur. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Town's against us, Clara said finally. Mr. Avery made that clear today. Town's against what they don't understand, Luke replied. But they're not the ones that matter here. Clara studied her hands, thinking of the whispers, the stares, the thinly veiled threats. They could still take him from me. No, Luke said firmly. They won't. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either was ready to examine too closely. Clara bent her head over her mending again, but her heart felt lighter than it had all day. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon. The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't move from his place beside Samuel. In the quiet ranch house, something new was taking root, fragile as a spring seedling, but growing stronger with each passing day. The following week settled into a gentle rhythm at the Carver Ranch, like the steady beat of horse hooves unpacked earth. Clara rose before dawn each morning, her hands quickly finding their way through ranch chores before heading to the schoolhouse. The familiar smell of coffee and wood smoke greeted her in Luke's kitchen, where he'd already be up. Quiet as ever, but leaving a cup warming by the stove for her, Samuel thrived in the new routine. His eyes bright with purpose each morning as he helped with the chickens before school. After lessons ended, he'd race his pony back to the ranch, eager to join Luke on his afternoon rounds. Clara watched from the kitchen window as Luke showed infinite patience, teaching the boy to handle rope, his weathered hands guiding Samuel's smaller ones with unexpected gentleness. On Wednesday afternoon, Clara finished cleaning the schoolhouse blackboard early. The walk home gave her time to reflect on how naturally Samuel had taken to ranch life. The boy who once struggled to sit still during lessons now listened intently when Luke explained about checking fence lines or identifying cattle brands as she approached the ranch. She heard Luke's steady voice carrying from the corral. Easy now. Keep your heels down. That's right. Samuel sat tall in the saddle atop one of the ranch's gentler horses, practicing his roping technique on a wooden calf. His face wore the same look of determination his Cherokee father had shown when teaching him to fish. The memory caught in Clara's throat. Like this. Samuel called out, swinging the loop with growing confidence. That's the way, Luke answered. His usual gruff tone softened. You're getting the hang of it, son. The word hung in the air. Luke's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by his own voice. Samuel beamed, not seeming to notice anything unusual, but Clara's heart skipped. She watched Luke turn away quickly, busying himself with coiling an extra length of rope. That evening, as Clara carried fresh linens past the bunkhouse, she overheard 2 ranch hands talking through the open window. Boss seems different lately, one said quietly. Saw him actually grinning yesterday when the boy managed to rope that post. First time. I've seen him smile in years, the other replied. Not since losing Sarah and the baby. Clara moved away quickly, not wanting to eavesdrop, but the words settled deep in her chest. Later, after Samuel was tucked into bed, she knelt beside her own bed as she did each night. The floorboards were cool against her knees as she bowed her head. Thank you, Lord, she whispered, for these small mercies. For giving Samuel someone to look up to, for bringing light back into dark places. She didn't hear Luke's footsteps pause in the hallway, didn't see him stand perfectly still, listening to her soft words of gratitude. But something in her gentle faith reached through his carefully maintained walls. Touching a place he'd thought long sealed away, Luke moved silently to his study, where a letter lay unopened on his desk. He'd received it that morning, but hadn't found the right moment to share its contents. Now, in the lamplight, he broke the seal and unfolded the crisp paper bearing the railroad company's letterhead. His jaw tightened as he read. The lawyer's words were carefully chosen, but clear enough questions about the original land grant, suggestions that certain boundaries might need review. Luke's hands shook with sudden anger. 5 years of building this ranch, of proving up the claim, and now some railroad men in fancy suits thought they could, ... double quotes Luke. Clara's voice came soft from the doorway. "Is everything all right?" He turned, ready to brush off her concern, but something in her steady gaze made him pause. Without a word, he handed her the letter. She read it carefully, her brow furrowing. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said finally. "Testing to see if you'll sell easily." Luke paced to the window, moonlight casting shadows across his face. "I ought to ride into town right now, tell them exactly what they can do with their review, and give them the reaction they want." Clara's voice remained calm. She laid the letter back on his desk. "These men expect anger, Luke. They count on it. But anger clouds judgment. And you'll need a clear head to protect what's yours." He turned to look at her, struck by the quiet wisdom in her words. Here was a woman who'd faced down plenty of threats herself, who'd learned to fight with patience rather than fists. "What would you suggest?" he asked, surprising himself with how much he wanted to hear her answer. "We gather information first," she said simply. "Find out exactly what they're claiming about the deed. Speak to others who might have received similar letters. Build our case carefully, so when we do act, it's from strength rather than fear." Luke felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "We," she'd said. "Our case." Somehow, in just these few days, his burden had become shared, lighter for having someone to help carry it. "You're right," he admitted, sinking into his chair. "Though I reckon it won't be easy staying patient." Clara smiled slightly. "Few worthwhile things are." She moved to leave, then paused. "Luke, thank you for what you said to Samuel today. About being like a son to you. Whether you meant to say it or not, it meant the world to him." Luke nodded, not trusting himself to speak. After she left, he sat for a long while in the quiet study, thinking about family and faith, about loss and unexpected second chances. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the range. But inside, the house felt warmer somehow, more alive with hope than it had in years. The letter still lay on his desk, its threats no less real, but they seemed less powerful now. Whatever came, he wouldn't face it alone. That thought carried him through the night, steady as a porch light guiding wanderers home. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright over the Carver Ranch, the kind of morning that made even the weathered fence posts gleam golden in the early light. Clara stood before the spotted mirror in the guest room, pinning her best hat with trembling fingers. The thought of attending church alongside Luke sent butterflies dancing in her stomach. Samuel burst into the room, his usually unruly hair slicked down with water. "Mama, look. I polished my boots just like Mr. Carver showed me." He thrust out one foot, showing off the gleaming leather dot. Clara smiled, smoothing his collar. "You look mighty fine, Samuel. Did you thank Mr. Carver for helping?" "Yes'm. He even let me use his special saddle soap." Samuel's eyes shone with pride, the creak of floorboards announced Luke's presence in the doorway. Clara turned, her breath catching at the sight of him in his Sunday best dark coat brushed free of dust. His usual work stubble cleared away. He cleared his throat. "Wagon's ready whenever you are." Mrs. Hensley. The drive into town was quiet, save for Samuel's excited chatter about the meadowlarks. Darting alongside the wagon, Clara sat straight-backed beside Luke, aware of every jolt and sway that brought their shoulders close. The morning air carried the sweet scent of prairie grass and the promise of summer heat to come as they approached the white-painted church. Clara's heart quickened at the sight of gathered townspeople. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Luke guided the wagon to a halt, helping Clara down with a gentle hand at her elbow. Pastor Whitcomb descended the church steps, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile. Brother Carver. What a blessed surprise! He clasped Luke's hand, then turned to Clara and Samuel. Mrs. Hensley, young Samuel, welcome. Welcome. The Lord's house opens its doors to all his children. Clara felt tears prick at his kindness. Thank you, Pastor. Inside, they settled into a pew near the back, though Luke's tall frame made them impossible to miss. When the first hymn began, Clara closed her eyes and let her voice rise clear and strong, the familiar words of Amazing Grace flowing from her heart. She sang, as she always had, with the pure joy that had first drawn her to lead the children's choir back east. Luke found himself transfixed. He'd heard plenty of singing in his ears, but never quite like this, sweet as spring water, steady as sunset. The sound seemed to wash away the dust and loneliness of his ranch, if only for a moment. When he realized he'd missed several verses just watching her, he quickly looked down at his hymnal, face warming. After the service, Clara led Samuel toward the door, hoping for a quick departure. But Mrs. Avery intercepted them, her face pinched with disapproval. Mrs. Hensley, her voice cracked like a whip. I must say, I'm shocked by your boldness, parading that boy in here among decent folk. Have you no shame? The church went silent. Clara felt Samuel press against her skirts, but she stood tall, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. My son has every right to worship here, Mrs. Avery. His father was a God-fearing man who died serving others. Samuel carries that same spirit of kindness in his heart, something I pray your children might learn from. Mrs. Avery's face flushed red. Well, I never know, Clara cut in, her voice gentle but firm. Perhaps you never have had to defend your child's right to exist in this world. I pray you never do, but I will stand here every Sunday and thank the Lord for my boy. Just as any mother would. A murmur rippled through the gathered congregation. Clara glimpsed several women nodding, and old Mr. Peterson tipped his hat to her as she passed. Luke appeared at her side, his solid presence like a wall between her and Mrs. Avery's sputtering indignation. The ride home was quiet again, but different from the morning tension. Samuel dozed against Clara's shoulder, worn out from the excitement. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass as Luke helped her down from the wagon at the ranch house. He finally spoke. What you did back there standing up to Mrs. Avery like that? It was something to see. Clara smoothed her skirts, suddenly shy. I hope I didn't cause trouble for you in town. Reckon? Some trouble's worth having. Luke's eyes crinkled at the corners. Truth is, I admired your spirit. Reminded me why I agreed to this arrangement in the first place. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. Thank you for being there. Just having you beside me meant more than you know. Luke nodded, gentle understanding in his eyes. Well now, best get this young ranch hand inside for his supper. He lifted the sleeping Samuel from the wagon with careful hands, carrying him to the house. That evening's meal was different from all the others they'd shared. The silence felt comfortable rather than strained. Samuel regaled them with his observations of the church's stained glass windows, while Luke actually smiled more than once. Clara found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting how the lamplight softened the worry lines around his eyes. When Samuel finally ran out of stories and headed to bed, Clara lingered at the table, cradling a cup of coffee. I want to thank you again, Mr. Carver, not just for today, but for everything. Luke studied his own cup for a long moment. Luke, he said quietly, Reckon after today, you might as well call me Luke." Clara smiled, something warm and hopeful unfurling in her heart. "Very well, Luke." The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the ranch house. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering dusk, its lonely song somehow less lonely than before. Neither Clara nor Luke moved to break the moment. Content to sit in the gentle quiet they'd found together, Samuel's voice drifted down from upstairs, asking for a glass of water. The spell broke, but something remained to shift, subtle as a change in the wind, but just as real. Clara rose to tend to her son, while Luke began clearing the dishes. Their movements around each other had grown easier, more natural, like partners in an unspoken dance. Later, as Clara prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the window glass. The worried woman who had first ridden out to Luke's ranch seemed far away now. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who could face down the Mrs. Averys of the world with grace and conviction. And perhaps most surprisingly, someone who no longer felt quite so alone. The midweek sun climbed high as Luke led Samuel down the winding path to Willow Creek, with Clara following close behind on her bay mare. The gentle sound of running water mixed with birdsong, while cottonwood leaves shimmered silver green in the breeze. Samuel bounced eagerly in his saddle, pointing at a family of deer drinking downstream. "Whoa there, son," Luke cautioned, the term slipping naturally from his lips now. Best not startle them. Clara watched as Luke showed Samuel how to guide his pony with subtle knee pressure, speaking in that quiet way of his that somehow commanded attention. Her heart warmed seeing them together, master and student, the boy hanging on Luke's every word. They dismounted in a shady grove where the creek widened into shallow pools. While the horses grazed nearby, Clara spread their picnic blanket beneath a massive cottonwood. She unpacked bread, cheese, and apple butter as Luke taught Samuel to skip stones across the water's surface. Like this, Luke demonstrated, sending a flat rock dancing 5 times before it sank. "You want to keep your wrist loose? See?" Samuel's first attempt splashed and sank, but his determination never wavered. "Tell me again how you learned this, Luke," he called out, already knowing the story, but eager to hear it once more. Luke settled onto the blanket beside Clara, accepting the sandwich she offered. His weathered face softened as he began to speak. "Well, I reckon I was about your age when my PA first showed me. We'd come down to this very spot after working cattle. ... Double quotes. His voice took on a gentle cadence as he shared memories of his childhood. On the ranch, learning to ride, helping with his first roundup, sleeping under stars during cattle drives. Clara noticed how the usual tension left his shoulders as he spoke, replaced by an ease she rarely saw. When Samuel's delighted laugh rang out at Luke's tale of falling into the creek while trying to catch a fish with his bare hands, an actual smile transformed Luke's face. The sight made Clara's breath catch. He looked years younger, handsomer than she'd realized. "Your turn, Samuel," Luke encouraged. "Show me what you learned." The boy's next throw skipped 3 times, earning proud nods from both adults. They spent another peaceful hour by the water, sharing stories and simple food, while meadowlarks trilled from nearby fence posts. It felt, Clara thought with a pang, like they were truly a family. But their idyllic afternoon couldn't last forever. As they rode back to Wardtown to collect mail before heading home, Clara noticed Luke's jaw tightening, his earlier warmth fading as they approached civilization down at the post office. A telegram waited for Luke. Clara saw his face darken as he read it, his knuckles whitening around the paper. "What is it?" she asked softly. "Railroads filed claim on my land," he ground out. "Says my deed ain't valid, that half my acreage belongs to them." He crumpled the telegram in his fist. "They aim to seize it within weeks." "But that's not possible," Clara protested. "Your family has worked this land for decades. Don't matter to them." Luke's voice was hard with rage. They've got lawyers, money, friends in high places. They'll forge whatever documents they need. The ride home was tense and quiet. Even Samuel seemed to sense the shift in mood, staying close to Clara as Luke spurred his horse ahead, his broad shoulders rigid with anger. That evening, after a mostly silent supper, Luke paced the wooden floor of the main room like a caged mountain lion. His boot heels struck a steady rhythm as he stalked back and forth, pausing occasionally to stare out the window at his threatened land. His inheritance, his life's work. Clara sat in the rocking chair, holding Samuel close as she read him a bedtime story. The boy's eyes kept straying to Luke's agitated figure until they finally drifted closed. When his breathing deepened into sleep, Clara gently carried him to bed, returning to the main room. She found Luke still pacing, moonlight casting his shadow long across the floor. She watched him for a moment, reading the fury and fear in every line of his body. "Luke," she said quietly, but firmly. "Come sit down." He turned to her, eyes blazing. "They can't take my land." "I won't let them." "No," she agreed, "we won't let them." "But wearing a trench in your floor won't solve anything." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please." After a long moment, he sank into it, though his fingers drummed restlessly on the armrest. "I know you're thinking of fighting," she said carefully, "of handling this with fists or worse." When he didn't deny it, she continued, "But that's exactly what they want. An excuse to label you dangerous, unreasonable. To turn the law against you." "The law?" He gave a bitter laugh. "The law's already against me. They've got money enough to buy whatever verdict they want. Then we fight them with proof, not violence," Clara insisted. "We gather evidence, find witnesses who remember when your family first settled here. We show them that forged documents won't stand against the truth." She leaned forward, catching his gaze. "And we pray. Luke, we ask for guidance and strength to face this battle the right way. Prayer won't stop them from stealing my land," he said roughly. But some of the wild anger had left his voice. "Maybe not," Clara acknowledged. "But it will help us find the wisdom to fight them properly. Your ranch isn't just land, Luke. It's your heritage, your future. Samuel's future too, if ... double quotes," she trailed off. Suddenly aware of how presumptuous that sounded, Luke studied her face in the lamplight. "You really believe we can beat them? With nothing but papers and prayers?" "I believe that truth and justice matter," she said steadily. "And I believe that a man like you, a man who would help a widow and her son without asking anything in return, deserves to win this fight." He was quiet for a long moment, his face in shadow. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "I reckon you might be right about doing this proper-like. But I can't promise I won't take matters into my own hands if they push too far." Clara nodded. Understanding this was the best compromise she could hope for tonight. "That's fair enough. For now, try to rest. Tomorrow we can start gathering what we need to prove your claim." Luke stood, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Thank you, Clara, for ... double quotes." He gestured vaguely, seemingly at a loss for words. "I know," she said simply. "Good night, Luke." He headed for his room, his steps slower and more measured than before. Clara remained in her chair, watching the moonlight silver the room, her mind turning over possibilities. The railroad's threat endangered not just Luke's ranch, but her own hopes for Samuel's future. Yet somehow, seeing Luke willing to consider her counsel gave her hope. Together, perhaps they could find a way through this crisis. She said a quiet prayer before retiring, asking for strength and wisdom for the battles ahead. As she passed Samuel's room, she heard him murmur in his sleep, and her resolve strengthened. For her son's sake, for Luke's, and for the future they might build together. She would help fight this threat, not with violence, but with faith and determination, The morning sun filtered through lace curtains. As Clara stood before the heavy wooden trunk in Luke's study, dust motes danced in the golden beams as she traced her fingers along the trunk's weathered surface. She had noticed it yesterday, tucked away in the corner, its brass hinges tarnished with age. "Lord, give me guidance," she whispered, kneeling beside it. The lid creaked as she lifted it, revealing stacks of yellowed papers and leather-bound journals inside. The musty scent of old paper and memories wafted up through the window. She heard Samuel's delighted laughter ring out from the corral. She smiled, pausing to watch Luke steady the boy on the dappled mare's bare back. Samuel's arms were spread wide, his face bright with joy as Luke led the horse in slow circles. "That's it, son," Luke called out, his voice carrying clearly. "Feel her movements. Let your body move with hers." Clara's heart warmed at the natural way Luke guided Samuel. In just these few weeks, the boy had flourished under his attention. But the railroad's threat loomed large, and she knew she had to find something to help secure their future. Turning back to the trunk, she began sorting through the papers methodically. Land deeds, cattle receipts, and old letters filled her lap. Then a bundle of letters, tied with faded blue ribbon, caught her eye. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, Luke's wife's correspondence. Clara hesitated, feeling like an intruder in this private grief. But necessity drove her forward. She carefully untied the ribbon and began to read. The first letter spoke of spring plantings and new calves. The second detailed a successful cattle drive. But it was the third letter that made her breath catch. "My dearest Luke," she read silently, "I've filed the land patent today, just as we discussed. The territorial office confirmed everything is in order. Your honor in dealing with the Cherokee families who had prior claim has served us well. Their testimonies supporting our rightful settlement meant everything. ... More laughter drifted in from outside. Clara moved to the window, watching as Samuel now sat more confidently on the horse's back. Luke's weather-worn face had softened, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes as he coached the boy. "Now squeeze with your knees." "Just like that," Luke instructed, his voice gentle. "The horse can feel your confidence growing." Samuel beamed with pride as he maintained his seat, and Clara saw Luke's shoulders relax in a way she hadn't noticed before. The man who had seemed so isolated when they'd first arrived was slowly emerging from his set. As the afternoon sun began to sink, Clara prepared a simple supper of cornbread and stew. The savory aroma filled the kitchen as Luke and Samuel came in, both dusty and grinning from their day's work. "Miss Clara, did you see?" Samuel bubbled with excitement as he washed his hands. "I rode Thunder bareback, just like the Cherokee warriors in Father's stories." "I saw, sweetheart," Clara smiled, ruffling his hair. "You did wonderfully." They settled around the table, and Samuel insisted on saying grace, as had become their custom. As they began eating, Clara gathered her courage. "Luke," she said carefully, "I hope you won't mind, but I spent some time going through the old trunk in your study today." Luke's spoon paused halfway to his mouth, its expression clouding. "Those papers are best left alone," he said gruffly. "Nothing but painful memories there." Clara reached out, laying her hand near his on the tablecloth. "I found letters from your wife," she said softly. "Letters that might help us fight the railroad's claim. Margaret's letters." Luke's voice roughened. He set his spoon down and pushed back from the table. "I told you, that's the past." "Let it lie, please," Clara persisted, gently. "There's something you need to hear." She retrieved the letter from her apron pocket. "May I?" Luke stood at the window, his back rigid, but finally gave a short nod. Samuel watched them both with wide eyes, sensing the tension in the room. In the golden lamplight, Clara began to read aloud. "My dearest Luke, I've filed the land patent today, ... as she continued. Luke's shoulders gradually lost their stiffness. He turned slowly, listening as Margaret's words described his fairness to the Cherokee families, his integrity in handling the land claim, and most importantly, the official filing of the patent. When Clara finished, silence filled the room. Luke's face was a study in raw emotion, grief, memory, and something else stirring beneath the surface. "Margaret always said I needed to keep better track of legal matters," he finally said, his voice rough. "She handled all that. After she was gone, I couldn't bear to look at any of it." Clara rose and crossed to him, the letter extended. "She was protecting your future, Luke. She made sure everything was properly filed. This could be what we need to fight the railroad's claim." Luke took the letter with trembling fingers. Reading it again to himself, Samuel slipped from his chair and went to stand beside him, leaning against his leg in silent support. "There are more letters," Clara said softly. "And I think there might be copies of the official documents too, if we keep looking." Your wife was very thorough. Luke cleared his throat, one hand dropping to rest on Samuel's shoulder. "Margaret would have liked you, Clara," he said quietly. "She believed in fighting for what's right, same as you do." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at this simple compliment. "Then let's honor her memory by protecting what she helped you build. Will you let me keep searching through the papers?" Luke studied Margaret's familiar handwriting for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll look together," he said. "After Samuel's in bed tonight, it's time I faced these memories." Samuel hugged Luke's leg. "Can I help too?" "I'm getting real good at reading now. Miss Clara says so." A ghost of a smile touched Luke's lips. "Tomorrow, son. For now, you'd best finish your supper before it gets cold." As they settled back at the table, Clara saw how Luke kept the letter close, occasionally touching it as if drawing strength from its presence. His grief was still there, but something had shifted, like a door long rusted shut had finally been eased open, letting in fresh air and light. Later, as the lamp burned low and Samuel slept soundly upstairs, Clara and Luke would begin the task of sorting through Margaret's carefully preserved papers. But for now, they simply shared the meal, their small family unit drawn closer by the day's revelations and the hope they offered for their future. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when Clara and Luke set out for town. Their horses' hooves kicked up dust along the rutted trail as they rode side by side. Luke's worn leather satchel containing the precious documents they'd discovered bulging against his saddle horn. Clara smoothed her best calico dress, grateful she'd left Samuel in the capable hands of Luke's housekeeper, Mrs. Peterson. The elderly woman had promised to keep him occupied with baking and stories while they attended to this urgent business. "Reckon old Peterson will have him spoiled with sugar. Cookies by the time we return," Luke said, a hint of warmth in his usually stern voice. Clara smiled, touched by how naturally he'd begun, including Samuel in his thoughts. That boy could charm cookies from a tree stump if he set his mind to. The town's main street was already bustling when they arrived. They tied their horses at the hitching post outside the whitewashed building that housed the notary's office. Luke's hand settled briefly at Clara's elbow as she navigated the wooden steps, the touch sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. Inside, Mr. Jenkins, the notary, peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles. His office smelled of dust and ink, shelves lined with leather-bound record books reaching toward the pressed tin ceiling. Clara watched anxiously as he examined the land patent papers they'd found, his liver-spotted hands careful with the aged documents. "These are legitimate." "Mind you," Jenkins said finally, adjusting his spectacles, "your late wife's signature is properly witnessed, and the territorial seal is authentic." He glanced at Luke. "But I must warn you, railroad companies are powerful entities. They've been known to produce their own documents with suspiciously recent dates." Luke's jaw tightened. "Meaning?" meaning these might not be enough on their own. Jenkins carefully refolded the papers. You'll want to present them at an open hearing where witnesses can testify to their authenticity. I'd be willing to speak to their validity myself. Clara watched Luke's shoulders tense beneath his worn denim jacket. How soon could such a hearing be arranged? 2 weeks, perhaps 3. Jenkins began preparing his official seal. I'll notify the territorial court today. While Jenkins worked, Clara moved to the window. Dark clouds were building in the western sky, and a cool wind had begun to stir the dust in the street. "Luke," she said softly, "we should start back. There's weather coming." They hurried to collect their now certified documents and mount up. But they'd barely cleared the town limits when the storm broke loose. The wind drove stinging rain into their faces, and lightning split the sky with brilliant forks. Their horses grew skittish, dancing sideways at each thunderclap. Line shacks just ahead. Luke shouted over the howling wind, "We'll wait it out there." Clara could barely make out the small structure through the curtain of rain, but Luke led them surely toward it. The wooden shack, used by cowboys during roundup season, stood sturdy against the storm's fury. Luke dismounted quickly and helped Clara down, then led both horses under the lean-to shelter attached to one side. Inside, the single room was spare, but dry. A narrow bunk-lined one wall, its rough blankets smelling of wood smoke. A small pot-bellied stove squatted in one corner, and a few basic supplies sat on crude shelves: coffee, beans, matches. Luke busied himself with starting a fire in the stove while Clara wrung water from her skirts. The small space felt suddenly intimate as thunder rolled overhead. Their wet clothes and the growing warmth from the stove soon filled the air with humidity. "You're shivering," Luke observed, shrugging out of his coat. He draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The weight of it settled around her, carrying his warmth and the familiar scent of leather and horse and man. "Thank you," she managed, pulling it closer. "I haven't been caught in a storm like this since ... double quotes. She trailed off, remembering another storm, another shelter, with her first husband. Luke seemed to sense her thoughts. He stood at the window, watching rain sheet down the dirty glass. Makes a body feel mighty small, don't it? All that power racing across the sky. Clara settled onto a rough-hewn bench, tucking her feet beneath her skirts. Sometimes I think that's not such a bad thing. Reminds us we're not in control of everything. Seems like I'm in control of precious little these days." The words came out barely above a whisper, but in the close confines of the shack, Clara heard them clearly. "The railroad, you mean?" Luke turned from the window, his face shadowed. "That's part of it." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "Everything I thought I had settled. Everything I thought I could handle alone. You don't have to handle it alone," Clara said softly. Their eyes met in the growing darkness, broken only by the red glow from the stove's vent holes. Luke's expression held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I lost them in spring," he said suddenly. "Sarah and the baby. Fever took them both in less than a week." His voice roughened. "After that, I figured it was safer not to let anyone else matter that much." Clara's heart ached for the pain she heard in his voice. "I understand fear, Luke. When Joseph died, I thought my heart would never heal. But God doesn't mean for us to wall ourselves away from love forever. You still have that much faith?" There was a wonder in his tone, and something else. Longing, perhaps? "I have to," she answered honestly. "It's what's kept me going, especially these past weeks. The hope that maybe ... double quotes." She hesitated, then continued softly. "Maybe God had something more in mind when he led me to your door than just saving Samuel." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both jump. Clara realized she was still shivering, despite Luke's coat and the warmth from the stove. "Here," Luke said gruffly, moving to the bunk. He pulled the blanket free and brought it to her. As he settled it around her shoulders, his hands lingered for a moment. The touch seemed to spark something electric between them. "Clara," he said hoarsely, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to risk it all again." She looked up at him. Seeing the battle in his eyes, fear warring with yearning, grief with hope. "Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we need others," she whispered. The storm raged on outside, but in that moment, something shifted in the small space between them. Though neither moved to close the distance, the air seemed charged with possibility. With promise, they passed the night in careful courtesy, Luke insisting Clara take the bunk while he settled on the floor near the stove. But sleep was long in coming for both of them, and in the quiet broken only by rain and distant thunder, unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Words of fear and faith, of loss and hope, of hearts beginning to thaw after too long a winter. Dawn painted the sky in watery pastels as Clara and Luke rode back to the ranch, their horses' hooves squelching in the mud left by last night's storm. The fresh-washed air carried the scent of wet sage and new possibilities. Though neither spoke of what had passed between them in the line shack, as they crested the last rise, smoke curled invitingly from the ranch house chimney. Inside, they found Samuel standing proud as could be next to old Pete, the ranch cook, both of them dusted with flour. A stack of golden flapjacks towered on a blue enamel plate. "Mama." "Mr. Luke." Samuel beamed. "I helped make breakfast. Pete showed me how to flip them just right." That he did, Pete confirmed, his weathered face creasing with pleasure. Boy's got a natural talent for it. Clara's heart warmed at the domestic scene. But she couldn't help noticing how Luke held himself apart, managing only a brief smile before retreating to his study with the land documents. Over the next few days, she watched him withdraw further into himself, shoulders growing heavier with each passing hour. Word spread through town like wildfire. The railroad lawyer planned to present his deed at the upcoming church meeting. When Clara heard the news from Mrs. Peterson after school, she hurried home to find Luke sitting defeated on the porch steps. "They won't stand with me," he said flatly, staring out at the darkening horizon. "Townsfolk will believe whatever that silver-tongued lawyer tells them. I reckon I should just give up now, save everyone the trouble." Clara settled beside him, her skirts rustling against the rough boards. Without hesitation, she reached for his calloused hand, clasping it firmly between both of hers. "That's not the Luke Carver I've come to know," she said softly. "I've seen your courage with Samuel, with the ranch hands. With me, you're stronger than you believe." Luke's fingers tightened briefly around hers before he pulled away. That evening, Clara watched from the kitchen window as he sat alone by the corral, his figure a dark silhouette against the sunset. She knew he was wrestling with demons stronger than any railroad man, grief that had never properly healed, fear of losing everything again. In her bedroom that night, Clara knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "give him the strength to fight. Help him remember he's not alone anymore." The little church was packed to the rafters that Sunday morning, with every wooden pew filled and folks standing along the back wall. Sunlight streamed through dust-moted windows as Mr. Avery stood at the pulpit, his face stern with assumed authority. "Friends and neighbors," he announced, waving a sheaf of papers, "the railroad's documentation clearly shows Luke Carver's deed is invalid. This land was never properly registered with the territory." Clara sat rigid in her seat. Samuel pressed close against her side. Luke occupied the end of their pew, his jaw clenched tight. The murmuring of the congregation grew louder as Mr. Avery continued his accusations, unable to bear it any longer. Clara rose to her feet, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "That's not true," she declared, pulling Luke's wife's letter and the land patent from her reticule. "I have proof right here." Mrs. Avery's sharp intake of breath cut through the sudden silence. Clara unfolded the yellowed papers, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the church as she read aloud. My dearest Luke, I filed our land patent today with the territorial office. Our ranch is secure now, just as you worked so hard to make it. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Avery stood up, her face mottled with anger. She's lying. That woman will say anything to keep her half-breed boy. Mrs. Avery. Pastor Whitcomb's voice rang out with quiet authority. He stepped forward, examining the documents Clara held. These papers bear official seals. We stand in God's house. Truth must prevail here. Luke had remained silent throughout, but now he pushed to his feet. His weathered face was full of emotion as he looked at Clara and Samuel. These are my family, he declared, his voice rough but clear. That boy is my son now. And Clara, double quotes, he paused, swallowing hard. Clara is the woman I love. The congregation fell silent. Then old Mrs. Peterson started clapping, followed by the ranchers' wives, then the entire church. Luke wrapped his arm around Clara and Samuel, drawing them close against his side. Clara felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as she leaned into his strength. Finally home, the railroad lawyer's face twisted with fury as he snatched up his papers. This isn't over, Carver, he snarled, stalking down the church aisle. The heavy door slammed behind him, rattling the windows. But his dramatic exit only seemed to strengthen the congregation's resolve. Old Jim Thompson, who ran cattle on the North Ridge, was the first to step forward. Luke, I've seen that land patent get filed myself 5 years back. I'll testify to that. More neighbors crowded around them. Mrs. Baker, who had 3 children in Clara's class, squeezed her hand. We'll all write letters for Samuel. The territorial agent can't ignore an entire town speaking up for one of our own. As the sun set that evening, Clara and Luke walked the fence line of their ranch. Stars began appearing one by one in the darkening sky, like diamonds scattered across purple velvet. The evening air carried the sweet scent of prairie grass and distant sage. Luke stopped at the old cottonwood tree, his voice rough with emotion. Clara, I need to tell you something. He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the first starlight. That morning you rode into my yard asking for help. Something in me came alive again. But I was scared. Scared of feeling anything after losing Margaret and the baby. Clara's heart quickened as she looked up at him. I was scared too, she whispered. Scared of trusting, of hoping too much. But watching you with Samuel, seeing your kindness, Luke's calloused hand gently cupped her cheek. You brought light back into my life, Clara Hensley. You and that boy of yours. Then he bent down and kissed her, soft and sweet, beneath the vast frontier sky. When they finally returned to the house, they found Samuel curled up in the big chair by the fire, fighting sleep. His eyes brightened as they entered. Are we really a family now? He asked, hope trembling in his voice. Luke crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the chair. Yes, son, he said firmly, gathering both Clara and Samuel into his arms. We really are. And nothing's ever going to change that. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bright. Townsfolk filled the county courthouse, their faces set with determination. One by one, they stepped forward to testify about Luke's character and his rightful claim to the land. Old Jim Thompson, who'd known Luke's late wife, Sarah, spoke of her careful attention to legal matters. Martha Wilson described how Luke had helped her family during the drought of '83. Expecting nothing in return, Clara sat straight-backed beside Luke. Her documented evidence spread neat and orderly before them. When the railroad's lawyer tried to press his forged claim, Pastor Whitcomb stood up, Bible in hand. The truth stands in black and white, he declared, pointing to Clara's papers. And in the memories of good people, the hearing ended swiftly. The railroad's case crumbled like dry leaves in autumn wind. Mr. Avery, red-faced and stuttering, faced censure from the town council for his part in the scheme. He slunk away, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. 3 days later, Clara stood beside Luke in the whitewashed church, Samuel between them. Pastor Whitcomb's voice rang clear as bells as he pronounced them man and wife. Luke's hands trembled slightly as he slipped his mother's gold ring onto Clara's finger. But his voice held steady with his vows. "I promise to love and protect you both," he said, including Samuel in his gaze, "all the days of my life." The schoolyard bloomed with celebration afterward. Trestle tables groaned under the weight of chicken pies, cornbread, and sweet potato puddings. Fiddle music filled the air as ranch hands and townspeople danced on the packed earth. Even Mrs. Avery came forward with a peace offering of fresh-baked rolls. Clara watched it all, her heart full to bursting. Just weeks ago, she had faced losing everything. Now she stood secure in love and community, her son safe beside her, her new husband's strong hand warm in hers. Happy. Luke murmured, drawing her close. "More than I ever dreamed possible," Clara answered. Watching Samuel teach the younger children a Cherokee dance his father had shown him. The other parents clapping along. The setting sun painted the schoolyard golden. Music and laughter rising like prayer into the evening air. Luke and Clara stood together, finally home in every sense of the word. Their land and family secured against all threats by truth, faith, and the strength of love. The evening shadows lengthened as Luke, Clara and Samuel made their way back to the ranch. The familiar silhouette of their home stood welcoming against the darkening sky. Lamplight already glowing in the windows where the ranch cook had lit the lamps before heading to his quarters. Clara moved easily around the kitchen, the copper pots gleaming as she prepared a simple supper of beef stew and fresh bread. The sound of splashing and laughter drifted in from the washroom where Luke helped Samuel clean up after their afternoon with the calves. "Pa, look at all the dirt," Samuel exclaimed, holding up his hands. "Just like a real ranch hand." Luke's deep chuckle mixed with the sounds of water splashing. "Real ranch hands know how to get clean too, son. Here's the soap." Clara paused in her cooking, savoring the word son on Luke's lips. How natural it sounded now, how right. The past month's arrangement had transformed into something. None of them had dared hope for a true family. They gathered around the oak table, now sitting closer than they had that first awkward evening 30 days ago. The lamplight cast a warm glow over their faces as Samuel folded his hands for grace. "Dear God," he began, his young voice clear and earnest, "thank you for giving me a PA and letting us keep our home. And thank you for Mama's good cooking and for the calves and for everything. Amen." Luke blinked hard, moisture gathering in his eyes as Clara squeezed his hand under the table. They shared a look that held volumes: gratitude, wonder, love. After the dishes were done, Luke stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool and sweet with sage, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast frontier sky. He stood there, hands braced on the railing, whispering words of thanks for the second chance he'd never thought to find. Clara joined him quietly, fitting herself against his side. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders as she rested her head against him. Neither spoke for a long moment, simply breathing in the peace of the evening and each other's presence. Their month's bargain had ended, but something far more precious had taken its place: love born of courage and faith. A family chosen and cherished, a home secured by truth and grace. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.